So, well, I'm a serial producer of slides, so, but I try not to use so many slides this time because there are hundreds of those because we are going around to try to describe what happened in Trieste. Probably some of you are familiar with this experience, and I'm sorry for the poor English, and of course I don't speak any Welsh, but despite my friendship with John Jenkins for many years. But anyway, we'll try to give an impression of how the system can be changed and how many of the problems that have been listed today in the morning we tried to cope with, but we are still in the middle of the way. And of course, we have a lot of new problems to face. So this is an experience we started like this describes very, simply in '71. It's an experiment, was seen at that time as an experiment of how it was possible to overcome the old psychiatric hospital and the entire organization of psychiatric hospital tried to transform this organization, open the doors like what was happening in other countries and in the UK, following the experience of the so-called therapeutic community that you know very well from Maxwell Jones, Tom Main, David Clark, and other people. At that time they were very famous. Now nobody reminds these names. But Franco Basaglia was following this international movement at that time, and also he took many ideas from other good experiences from the USA. For instance, the idea of the community mental health center that the Kennedy reform started to set up. From France, the idea of having the sector, so the sector of the town organized in services displayed in the community but connected to the hospital with the final aim to at least reduce the importance of the hospital, centrality of the hospital in the organization, psychiatric hospital, I mean, of course. But Basaglia was a little bit more radical at that time because he started from a very strong point on the criticism of psychiatry. So one of the most famous books at that time was named What is Psychiatry? So this was a fundamental question about what was the historical role of psychiatry, its constitution, its historical construction in terms of creating a sort of science or so-called science which can provide legitimation of the social exclusion of the people into the psychiatric hospitals, as John described before today in the morning. So, and Basaglia was very clear about focusing on psychiatric hospital as the concrete, the practical demonstration what is psychiatry. So psychiatry is not something that describes the mental illness or tries to understand the experience of people with mental ill problems, but it's something that provides justification to these institutions at that time. So Basaglia was shocked because he came from an academic background. He was very prominent, so-called at that time, phenomenological psychiatry. So looking at the phenomenology of the individual in its own life, in its place in the world. But suddenly he recognized that it was impossible to have a proper encounter with that individual if you don't change the conditions where this individual spent most of his life, which is the total institution, the asylum at that time. So Basaglia was part of this movement in Italy that started from inside, from within the psychiatric institutions, and tried to transform the conditions of life first of the inmates and then opening the possibility of living in the community. Basaglia worked in Gorizia and then in Trieste. With Basaglia there was a movement called Psichiatria Democratica. Probably some of you are familiar with this old, it is still alive. It's a movement that was based on practices. So what John mentioned today was not only based on ideologies. At that time these were considered to be ideologies because to be against the medical model seemed to be very close to the movement in the society which criticized any authoritarian approach to the life of the individuals, and so try to liberate and to set people free from all the constraints and oppression everybody can experience in society. So this was the great idea at that time, not to detach psychiatry from what's happening in the overall social fabric, but try to embed the change into a wider movement. Basaglia started in Gorizia, opening the doors of the psychiatric hospital, starting with the meetings in the wards, and so opening to the voice of the inmates, focusing on their needs, a very practical approach, giving them the possibility to express these needs and making experiences outside of the hospital, so accompanying them to regain all the links with their families, with their social networks, and then try to regain a sense, a meaning in their life. This was a fundamental power shift that the complementary approach was to work on the administrative side to regain all the means to give income, housing, work possibilities, what everybody needs as an individual in society. So, and this was seen at that time as a social psychiatric approach. It was not really social psychiatry, it was something wider, which really tried to influence also the way that society look at people with mental health problems. In Trieste, Basaglia was more successful than in Gorizia, where he was stopped because the jump from the institution to the community services that should be constructed into the community areas should be stopped by, forbidden to some extent by political decision. Then he resigned and he was appointed as director of the hospital in Trieste, where he was supported by a top-down. But more than that, he created a movement bottom-up among the professionals and using all the resources of the individuals who were in the psychiatric institution, because they were the real resources for making them imploding to some extent, making it imploding. So the transformation in Trieste started from that point, so reconverting the resources, changing the mentality, changing the practices, and working inside means that opening a ward would mean changing the hierarchical organization inside to a more peer-based approach, where also the clients should have a say, but empowerment start bottom-up, so all the nurses should leave their custodial role toward their therapeutic role, for instance, and express their creativity. So this was not very much about creating new procedures, but criticizing the old organization and trying to find innovative and creative ways to deal with this problem. So in a strong link with the family networks, with the society, with what was happening in, for instance, trade union movement, in the idea of regaining the rights of citizenship for people with mental health problems. This change took about 9 years to be completed in Trieste. So the shift was from this psychiatric hospital of 1,200 people toward a network of community mental health services. When I started to work there, let me say some personal experience. I just arrived to Trieste from southern Italy and to try to understand something of this experience, and I entered into a house which was called the Centro di Salute Mentale, and this house was really a house where it was very difficult to define who were the professionals, who were the clients, and who were the visitors or the carers. So I didn't have any point of reference, so I started to ask to a very what can I say, authoritarian guy who was sitting with a bird in a chair and the sort of reception there. So, and then I asked him some information, and he was very precise, very accurate. At the end, I heard that he was a client. So he was a client just attending the center, but he was really mixed with the other people there. And the perception was very close to what has been described a few days ago in a meeting that we had in the mental health center, by the new leaders of the users, of the clients, of people with lived experiences in Trieste, when he said, well, I feel better here because this is un ambiente destrutturato orientato alla recovery. That means something like an unstructured environment, informal or organic environment, recovery oriented, which is nice. I really appreciate this kind of. So the effort at that time was to create a situation not only changing or dismantling the old organization toward a more horizontal one, but creating places where people can, in a way, experience in a different way their feelings, their good and bad feelings, good and bad moments in life, and but share, stay with, be with other people, particularly professionals, but also carers and volunteers. We had a lot of volunteers. We still have people coming, for instance, from South America and staying for months in Trieste because of the commonality of the language. People coming from Argentina, from sometimes Italian origin, they can stay. There are young psychologists that can stay as volunteers, and other people can, create a sort of broader environment. Artists, we had some great people supporting the experience at the beginning, like Dario Fo or Ornette Coleman, jazz man, came to play in the hospital of Trieste. But still this idea of having something open to the society with a lot of contribution, which is not simply a change in the specific field of psychiatry, but something broader. So when now we have, for instance, the theatrical group going to Brazil, having a sort of tour there, they are really working with the artists of Brazil, or they work in Trieste in the real theater because they achieved a good, also professional level of their performances. And so I think it's important to create an interaction in the real world. People access services today. The people can, from Trieste, they can just walk into a community mental health center. Our organization is called the Department of Mental Health. It encompasses, maybe we can look at some of this. We can go on. This is the mental health department. Okay, this is description of the organization. We have 4 community mental health centers today. These are so-called 24-hour community mental health center because they have beds inside, so they have the possibility to host people when they need to stay in a sort of protected environment for a while, even for just one night, with any formal admission or hospitalization. We call it hospitality. People are called guests, like it was in the former psychiatric hospital when it was open. Some people were just staying in the hospital because they have no alternatives where to live temporarily. So they were considered to be guests, not inmates anymore, the vast majority. And so today the mental health center, they are open around the clock. In one of those centers is also based the university clinics, so we have link with the academic activities. And there is just a small unit in General Hospital, which we are still going on and trying to consider not a typical acute unit, but just a first aid spot where people can access after 8 o'clock at night and sometimes spend the night in a bed there, but very quickly in the following morning being referred to the community mental health center team, which is obliged to come very soon. So we have this, with this practical shift very quickly to the community mental health centers. And we have a service of rehabilitation residential support, but my colleague Pina Ridente, who is here, will speak about this quickly, in more detailed way, so I won't mention, but it's an important service at the interface with all the NGOs, particularly social cooperatives, associations, which work with us as partners in a number of projects. And this is something similar what was in an incredible way has been described today in Plymouth. But our effort is to create something which is called mental health, which is far beyond the professional field, so it's something wider, including day centers run with associations and with social cooperatives, and recovery homes and clubs. That sometimes includes people like a philosopher discussing philosophical issues with our clients and with his students, so trying to again put something which is in strict interface or connection with what happens in the society. The staff is declining, going down, but we have increasing the informal staff at the same time, so these numbers are not reliable in terms of the real people working day to day, because we have a lot of people that work in these NGOs that support people with mental health problems in the ordinary lives day to day in group homes, in their individual houses, in supporting employment, in socialization, in social activities of many kind. Different kind. And this is the group of people that are the professionals, particularly psychiatrists. We have a lot of psychiatrists, but I don't recommend. But this is the historical situation in Italy with a lot of doctors so far. So we have to work with them and try to find a role which is still can be an important role if they are included in the overall scheme. So what I would like to say is that this environment oriented to recovery is a place where people can access very easily. The citizens don't need a formal referral by a GP, for instance, but they can have it. So they can just call the center or come to the center physically and ask for a first talk with the staff. This is organized in real time, so we can provide a first talk in very quickly, in a few minutes or 1 hour. And this includes, of course, taking care of crisis. So we don't want to separate some functions like crisis teams or assertive outreach teams like you have in the UK, which is fine, and we had a lot of discussion with our colleagues, and these have been developed in an excellent way here. But we try to do it in a generic whole team approach, and we prefer to define functions rather than subgroups and subteams, and to in a way split this. This requires a management day to day of this living being, which is the group. The group includes not only the professionals, but everybody who use the center, like of course the users, but the family members and volunteers. So we have ordinary daily meetings, which are sort of assemblies that last 1 hour, 1 hour and a half sometimes, where everybody can express their feelings, their points about all the most important issues, including individual cases, of course, plan of care, but also general programs, new ideas. Recently, we had this great experience to relaunch the idea, very old, of the assemblies, and I recommend very, very much, because the mental health center is, as you understand, is an open door on the street, so everybody can come in. It's a sort of community, which is not defined in their borders, but it's a broad community, and this community must live, must be helped to be alive, and so I think it's important creating a situation where everybody can express their points, like this 2-hour assembly once a week, where all the professionals and all the users who want to come, and other people like clients, like carers and other, can attend. And we focus on many topics. For instance, one of the most interesting and important and sometimes moving, I can say, experience for me was that one dedicated to the last, to the report of the last Hearing Voices conference in Italy. So where I understood that many people had this experience, many more than what that I knew in the audience, and so they started to speak, including some professionals about some of their relatives, and so this created a different awareness, a different understanding. This community mental center is a place where it's in a balance between a typical community-based service, where you you can imagine, domiciliary visits, crisis care, social work, and social support. Every day we have people coming and having lunch and dinner in the center for free or with a small ticket, for keep the also the sense of respect of this action. But on the other hand, it's something that is in a balance between a social environment that is important to mediate to what is happening outside the center. So it's a typical place where this balance must be preserved. For instance, I don't want to create again a place which is like an outpatient department where people just is waiting for appointments and sitting in chairs and in a passive way, and there is no social life. Or we are not so enthusiastic about the so-called the day centers, where the so-called chronic people are attending every day for sometimes for a long period of time, but create a situation where everything can be mixed in an unstructured way, and something new can happen, where you can stay half an hour or you can stay 4 hours and then come back to your house, and you are not obliged to be submitted to a structured time and structured programs, but have possibilities where artists of the community can have a course for 1 month or 2 months and create a sort of exhibition, or be linked to other things happening outside, like going to the football as a football supporter on Sunday, including those who are admitted 24 hours who are in crisis. So this is something that, for instance, a young nurse used to do in the center. So this is the bearing axis of our organization. So a place where, in a way, people can spend part of their time, but on a free basis. So it's not obliged to stay within procedures which are regulated. On the other hand, of course, you can imagine there is the normal activity of the community center, like having visits, providing medications, discussion among professionals, and so on, and also links with the rest of the organization. The mental health department is included into a wider change that happened in Trieste about the community medicine. So this is what you call mainstreaming, I think. We have some good and some bad points about that, but this is the development we are witnessing now in Italy, and particularly in the region Friuli. My friend Renzo Bon will speak about Udine tomorrow, I think, which is another experience developed in the same region. So we have now a regional level. It's not only Trieste, but it's the whole region Friuli, which is taking the same model and which is now almost completed. So we are linked to the so-called healthcare districts. The healthcare districts is located in the same catchment area of our community mental health center. So we are, in a way, twinned with these organizations. They can offer family counseling, child and adolescent care, elderly care, including home visits, the disabled services, and link with the social services, a number of specialist medicine on an outpatient basis or a domiciliary basis. So the idea is to, in a way, embed mental health into general health. So point 1 of integration. Point 2 is what can happen in terms of the link with the social services. And Pina Ridente will describe what we are trying to do in terms of personal budgets, which is one of the way, like you have here, I think, the experiment of the direct payments, something similar and a little bit different, so you can maybe have more information, certainly later. But the idea is to integrate health and welfare in a co-planning around the person, because the person should be the focus, and we wouldn't limit this to the concept of recovery, which is clearly important, but to a wider idea of citizenship. So recovery should be linked to citizenship, should be linked to social inclusion, should be linked, in my idea, to the constant deinstitutionalization, in the sense that we didn't finish the work just closing the mental hospital, but we have to go on because aspects of the institution are being recreated in the day-to-day service everywhere. So, and we are now, for instance, obsessed in Italy by the risk and, yes, the risk control as it arrived. Some years ago I came here and I was, but now we are in the same, in the same thing. So, and so a lot of bureaucratic things that are not really certainly in favor of creating the unstructured, organic environment that people needs. So, anyway, this idea is to define mental health issues in a broader way. So, for instance, an old person is an old person, is an elder, with the complexity of his or her life. So, is not an elder that should be followed by psychogeriatric service, which is a specialist service dedicated to those who have some cognitive impairment, for instance, or dementia. But in a wider sense, there should be the social service working on a planning on the day-to-day issues, including housing, if this person can be supported in an autonomous way or with some supports. There should be, of course, the geriatrician, the GP, and the psychiatrist, if it is required in terms of providing the limited type of medication and with all the checks which are required in this case, so not giving medication for forever. So this is another point which is very important. The other development is what's happening in terms of the productive role of the clients. So the social cooperative is a reality, not only in Trieste, but in Italy. It's a movement that includes more than 2,500 small companies, where the membership means having a vote, having the same roles and the same rights than all other members of the company. These are real businesses, so they can compete in the public tenders in applications. They, for instance, in Trieste, they cover a range of about 20-25 different kind of activities, including running a beach, running a bar, a restaurant, computer services that can be used, the museum in town, and that can be used by all the citizens of Trieste. So again, to work into the community, inside the community, not creating something aside. Well, I think I'm going to finish. Would like to. Some questions are welcome, of course, but the family are important. So the social network is important. I heard today speaking about creating a network of all the stakeholders. In our case, of course, you can imagine in Italy the family was the critical side, sometimes the critical friend, sometimes were seen as enemies at the beginning of the institutionalization movement. But today they are important in our system. So we try to engage them from the beginning in what is the contract for the therapeutic pathway of care that we are setting up together with the client, and so they can play a role, which is an important role if we are able to give value of this role. And there are research on recovery that are being developed in northern countries that demonstrate that if the family member are accepting this sometimes ambiguous role at the beginning, and they are very important to support and to stay with as a testimonial of recovery all the way through the recovery processes. So these are supported, the family members are supported through a specific psychoeducation typical course, but also creating groups of discussion into the single community mental health centers, particularly those with the heavy burden, can have a possibility to discuss, to have a clear point of reference, and with the idea to create a transparent service where you can be accountable to these groups and try to define, again, together what are the most important common concerns. Other points are this idea of the social capital, which is clearly important. So not only preserving people in their social roles, but enhancing the possibility toward new developments. And I think this starts from a very basic idea, starting with values. So we think that an organization which is only based on procedures cannot have a simple life in the community work, but you must be clearly focused on values that been shared through the organization. For instance, for us, preserving the person in his own experience, even in the bad movements, is a key idea. And all the members of the organization are trying to defend the person from the simplification, from the illness, from what is the illness can create on the people's lives. That is over imposing a label that simplify, in medical terms, what's happening in your sometimes hard and difficult experience. So this is what has been defined an invented institution as a whole, with all the tricks and traps of the institution. So we are fully aware that these are new institutions. So the only way of not recreating the old way and creating new practices is to keep people involved very much. So and to define the group, the community, as the community of all the stakeholders. Well, I think this model is still interesting for all the organization in Italy. It's a battle, because if you go to many places in Italy, as has been described by Ron and Karen before, you can find awful small acute units, overcrowded, even with 16 beds, very micro units, but with locked doors and use of restraint. More than 70% of them use restraint in Italy. So clearly, closing psychiatric hospital, which occurred in Italy, and there are no one single beds of mental hospital for the year 2000 in Italy anymore, but this doesn't prevent to replicate institution in different forms in the community, including, for instance, the nursing homes for elderly people, where you can find, probably also here, some very subtle means of restraint in the protection of health, for instance, or security or risk. And so this is a constant and permanent work of trying to prevent new forms of institutionalization, creating community development and community engagement, and keep the door open on the street. Okay.
Thanks, Roberto. We want to try and work to time, but I think we'll manage one or two quick questions if anybody's got a question. Anybody like to raise a question? Yes, over there.
Yes, there are. We involved the new families in the proposal of attending a so-called a course of 10 sessions about how is the organization of the services, what is mental illness, what we can do in terms of therapies, what are the problems for the families, how you can help the family to face with these problems, what is the experience of the family member, which is particularly important as a subject, as an individual. And so this is usually important to create a different kind of partnership and awareness with the client. This changed dramatically in our experience. The request for emergency care, because before, when we had in the 80s, for instance, we had a lot of calls during the day because families are worried about many things, and so we are running everywhere as a typical crisis team you have in the UK. So we are very much focused on crisis. And this kind of approach changed very much the perception of having something which is not so terrible. We can cope with these problems if we understand better. And we have anymore very few typical kind of crisis care. So of course we are available, we are on the spot, we go home very quickly to assess situation, to intervene in situations, sometimes with the police if we cannot avoid it, but we are there. but we are much more focused now on the recovery pathway and on the construction of the social supports for people in the process of recovery, like Pina will describe.
Your concept very good, because I have bipolar, and I think what hasn't been raised much today is how lonely mental illness can be. Not necessarily, you can be lonely among people because your illness makes you lonely. And what I liked about you're saying is anyone can come. You don't have to be referred. And I think what a lot of people underestimate is how difficult it is for someone when you're mentally ill. Almost your illness makes you lonely because it's so difficult to connect. And I don't think that's been mentioned enough today, that difficulty of just, I mean, I in my local thing, I have a very good support system with CPNs, but they now have a system where you can't leave a message for your CPN because somebody's abused it. Well, what's the bloody point of having them? You know, do you know what I mean? It's the loneliness, I think, gets forgotten.
Yeah, I think this is the central point. We have a small study. We are not so good in research, but to be honest, but we had a small study with our group of young people, supported also by social activities, as compared to another group, control group, and this clearly demonstrated that the difference was not the kind of treatment they'd received, but the level of social relationship they established to get out of their loneliness. So this was important at any age, particularly for young people, but for everybody. Yeah. So yeah, I think this is a crucial point. And that's why, for instance, we have this reduced number of involuntary treatments. So in Italy, it's low. It's 30 per 100,000 every year, which is one of the lowest in Europe. But in Trieste, we have 7 per 100,000. It means very few people receiving voluntary care because it's this easy access. And at any time, people can just refer. And it's a very simple concept, but it's very difficult to apply because of the resistances of professionals. And so and so and so.
Right, thanks very much. We're keeping much to time, so I think we'll call it a day there. Just one more time. I found that absolutely fascinating. Thanks, Roberto. What's so great about these things is that we get a point of lots of points of comparison. That then every now and again you go, wow, that's a bit different, and it sets us thinking. Which is absolutely what these events must be for. So we can have another round of applause for Roberto. That's great. Thanks very much.